Hello and welcome to CS 303, chapter number 4 and lecture number 3. So, once again, welcome to CS 303. This is chapter number 4 and lecture number 3. So, this is going to be a short chapter, and most likely we will wind up this chapter with today's lecture, right? So, the goal or the objective of this chapter are to give you some sense of what threads are, what is the multi-threading concept, right? In what way threads are different from processes. Why does it make sense to have multi-threaded applications like a multi-threaded web server? Why does it help to make an application like Microsoft Word multi-threaded? Right. So essentially, the rationale for it. So besides that, the other part of the chapter which we looked at was the pthread API. So given a Linux system, how can we create simple multi-threaded programs? So in that regard, one program was discussed in the last lecture, in which we had an original process which gave birth or which spawned another thread, right? So our original process with another thread, and then that thread did some work. So later on we'll also discuss some programs which employ multi-threading. So just to give you some more practice, we will discuss some other multi-threaded programs either in the lecture or in the live session that we have. Okay. So for today, the topic that we have is thread implementation. Okay. So we will see that threads are sometimes called lightweight processes. Okay. So a thread is sometimes called LWP or a lightweight process. So you can kind of understand why, because in many regards it's like a process, because it has its own set of instructions to execute. It's got its own program counter, its own stack pointer, and so on. And in many ways it's not as resource hungry or resource intensive as a process, right? So many things that all the threads that belong to a particular process will share with each other, code for example, and because of that, as we had discussed, creating threads is quite cheaper as compared to creating separate processes. Okay. So because all of them share the same address space, so the memory management part of the routine, which decides every time we want to create a process, where should the address space be. So that's one example of something which is not done when we're creating another thread in the same process. Okay. So therefore, a thread is also called a lightweight process. Okay. So, and so because it's a process, therefore it can be implemented in user space or kernel space, because goal of a process or goal of a thread is to execute instructions. Now these instructions or this code can either belong to user space, user application, or it can belong to kernel space, kernel application. So just like we have user code and kernel code, and we have processes which correspond to user processes and kernel processes. Example of a user process, something like PowerPoint. Example of a kernel process, anything that uses a kernel service, anything that uses an IO device, anything that does scheduling, anything that does memory management. So lots of processes. So in chapter number 3, we've seen how we can look into the system. We can peek into the system and see a list of kernel threads, kernel processes also. So today we'll see, we'll learn about these user threads and kernel threads and what are the differences between them. So that is the main focus of today's lecture. Threads implementation. Okay. Okay. Now I am on slide number 2. and now we are going to start talking about thread implementation. Okay. So now we already have a good sense of what a thread is. How does it differ from a process? We can write basic programs with regards to threading. So now we'll talk a bit about thread implementation. Okay. So as such, there are two main places to implement threads: either user space or kernel space. So we saw in the earlier chapters that we have these two kind of address spaces. So some block in memory, that is user space, another which is kernel space. So as such, what happens is within user space the user processes run, and within kernel space the kernel processes run, right? So, and from time to time, of course, we learned that we have what we call these kernel crossings, right? So a process while executing happily in user space will or might need some kernel service, right? Maybe it needs some IO which is to be performed. So any time it needs any service from the operating system, we have a kernel crossing, mode bit changes, and we go from user space to kernel space. And how is the service invoked by the user process? We learned in chapter 2. It is invoked by making a system call. So this user in the user space, you make the system call, and then we have a kernel crossing to kernel space, and the system call is implemented, and then you get back the result, and again you go back from kernel to user space. So we learned all of this in chapter number 2 when we were discussing system calls. So therefore, when we are executing process code, it can either be in user space or kernel space. Likewise, because since a thread is a lightweight process, threads can also be user threads or kernel threads. So we have a user thread when the thread is executing code in user space, and we have a kernel thread when a kernel is executing code in the kernel space. Okay. So just like we have user processes and kernel processes, we have user threads and kernel threads. Okay. Therefore, we can implement threads in user space or kernel space. So now we'll discuss both of these designs in more detail. Now option 1, put threads package in user space. Okay. So which means now the threads are implemented in, or they run in user space. Okay. So think about that for a minute. The threads run in user space. Okay. So as far as the kernel is concerned, kernel knows nothing about these threads. Okay. And thread management operations require no kernel intervention. All the thread management operations are taken care within user space. Okay. As far as the kernel is concerned, the kernel will see and manage only a single threaded process. So from the kernel point of view, it is managing only one process. So remember, right, you have one process, and then using the appropriate system call, it can create as many threads as it wants, right? So what is the name of the system call to create a thread? Well, as the name suggests, pthread underscore create. So you have a process, and that process during the course of its execution can create multiple threads. So now in this first option, where the threads are executing and are being implemented in user space, from the point of view of the kernel, it sees and manages only a single process. It is not aware of the fact that that process has spawned, that process has created multiple threads. The kernel is blind to that fact, and as far as the kernel is concerned, it is managing only that process. Okay. It knows nothing about the threads. Okay. So how are the threads implemented? The threads are implemented by a library, software library, which is nothing but a collection of thread functions. Right? A library is nothing but a collection of functions. In this case, it's a collection of thread functions. Okay. So this is actually a runtime system, a collection of procedures that manage threads. So which means that all these you call all these functions which are in your library, in your runtime library, and they're all in user space. Which means for when you call any of these functions, you are not doing a kernel crossing. Right. Therefore, these operations are very fast. So each process now needs its own private thread table to keep track of all its thread and their properties. Okay. So now because each process can give rise to many threads, and the process will now, since the process itself in user space is doing the management, that's the whole idea of this design. Threads are being implemented in a user space. So since the process is as such managing all the threads in user space, so it needs some kind of a data structure, again implemented in user space, to manage the threads, and that is the private, that is the thread table. So that thread table is private to that process. So it's sort of a table, sort of a data structure which it uses to keep track of all its threads and their properties. So which threads are running, what is the value of program counter, what are the contents of stack pointer, right, which registers on your operation, so on and so forth. Okay. So of course this is more work for each process because earlier the OS was taking care of this. Advantage of this approach: thread operations such as context switch are faster as functions are implemented in user space. No trap to the OS needed. So as it should be quite clear now, the various thread operations. An example of a thread operation: context switch. So switching the context from one thread to the other. So such thread operations now happen entirely in user space. So let's say you have a process P which is now running, and from the kernel point of view it only sees a process, and now this process has spawned 5 threads all in user space, and then right now thread 1 is running, and then it's giving this CPU to thread 2, then 3, then 4. So kernel is not aware of any of this switching. As far as the kernel is concerned, process P is running, that's it. So all this context switching is happening in user space. It's happening in user space, and the particular process has to manage all of that. Okay. So therefore, because you don't have any kernel crossings, you don't have any system calls, so the overhead of these operations is less. Overhead to create a thread, overhead to do context switch, this overhead is quite less because there is no kernel crossing, no system call. Okay, so that is the advantage of this approach. However, on the flip side, there is more work for each process, more bookkeeping for each process. Okay. So now I am on slide 3. A nice picture taken from Tannenbaum's textbook, illustrating the difference between user and kernel threads. So right now we've just talked about the first one, 2.16a. So this is a user thread level thread package, and you can see what is going on here. We've got 2 processes, right? Process 1 has spawned or created 3 threads. Process 2 has spawned or created 4 threads. Each process is maintaining a thread table containing how many entries for process 1? 3. How many entries for process 2? 4. Each entry per thread. Okay. And from the kernel you see it's just maintaining a process table, right, which means it has information about process 1 or process 2. Now as we said, which threads are there in each process, what operations are those threads are doing. From the kernel point of view, it knows nothing about that, it is totally blind. All it sees is the one process. That's it. Okay. So runtime system is just collection of functions which do those thread operations. Okay. So this is this is a user level threads. So we will come back to this picture later when we talk about kernel level threads also. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 4, threads in user space. So of course we talked about the advantages of implementing threads in user space. The main most important advantage is efficiency, right? These thread operations, they happen a lot quicker because so there are no system calls, there are no kernel crossings, no traps to the OS. They're all handled in user space. Okay, so less overhead. So the thread operations are quite fast, whether it's creating a thread or whether it's context switching between threads, so on and so forth. Okay. Now, some challenges as well, and one major challenge is something which we'll discuss now, is the issue that what happens if one thread blocks. Okay, so let's take an example. So in the chapter on memory management, we'll learn about a term called page fault. So generally what happens in this page fault is the chunk of memory. So we divide the memory into chunks called pages, and then a particular page which is needed for the execution of a program. It may so happen that the page is not in main memory, because obviously main memory is not enough to accommodate the pages of all processes. So using some intelligent algorithm, maybe we can guess which pages are needed, only bring those in. So we learn about this in memory management. But while accessing, it may so happen that the memory chunk or the page which is needed is not in main memory. So the idea is, of course, main memory is volatile. The persistent copy is kept in the disk of that page. So we need to grab or we need to get that page from the disk. So there will be one thread, and one thread will need a particular page, right? So it will do a page fault, which means now that page has to be retrieved from the disk and brought into main memory. And then once it's in main memory, then the thread can access it. So what happens is while this IO is being performed from disk, page related IO, then the thread involved in this page fault blocks. So thread 1 needs a page which is in a disk. Thread 1 blocks. Now we have to do that disk IO. Now look at this situation from the point of view of the kernel. Now kernel, note that it knows nothing about the existence of the threads. It is only doing implementing or keeping track on a per process basis. So it knows that this process A is executing. It doesn't know within process A thread 1 is executing or thread 2 or thread 3 or whichever thread. So kernel says that this process is blocked, right? So kernel, not knowing about the existence of threads, blocks the whole process, which means all the threads. So now the downside of this is you cannot give the CPU to some other thread of that process, because the whole process, including all of its threads, have been blocked, because the kernel has no way of knowing about the existence of the constituent threads. So when it doesn't even know about the existence of the threads, it will definitely not know which one is blocked and which one is ready. So all it knows is this process is blocked and now it will be on hold. Okay. So even if other threads within that process are ready to execute, whole process blocks. So this is a disadvantage. If a user level thread blocks in the kernel, the entire process blocks. Okay. Another issue, no multi-programming with user level threads. So obviously, because at any time only one of the threads can be allotted the CPU. So this is because kernel assigns one processor to each process. So let's say fine, process A, again not knowing that it has 3 threads, to process A I will assign one CPU. So to really get the advantage of multi-threading, we should, what should we do? We should ensure that each thread gets a separate CPU. In this case, not possible because the kernel doesn't know about the existence of the threads. Okay. So, 2 disadvantages of user level threads that we saw. First is, if a user level thread blocks in the kernel, the entire process blocks. Even if other threads in that process are ready to run, they cannot. And another issue, for a particular process, we can have no multiprocessing with all its constituent threads. Of course, 2 separate set threads belonging to separate processes, they can always do parallel execution. So as you can see, both positives and negatives. Positive is efficiency, negative is blocking issue and a multi-processing issue. Yeah. So I hope it's clear. Right, let's move on. Okay, now I am on slide number 5 and the title for this is threads in kernel space. Okay. So in the previous option what we saw was that we are implementing these threads in user space, right? And from the kernel point of view, it is just managing one process. It is oblivious, it has no knowledge about all of these threads. Now in this design option that we are talking about, that is not the case. Here we are implementing threads in kernel space, which means the kernel fully well is aware of the existence of all the processes and all the threads within all of these processes. Okay. So that's option 2, implementing threads in kernel space. So here there is no thread table for each process. Kernel maintains a thread table keeping record of all the system threads. So which means now the kernel will maintain 2 data structures. One is a process table keeping track of all the processes that it's currently supporting, which in our example will be 2. And in addition to the process table data structure, the kernel will also maintain the thread table data structure. So that will have number of entries equal to number of threads. So if like in our example we assume process A has 3 threads, process B has 4 threads, so total 7 entries will be there in the thread table. Okay. So it can implement thread table in many ways. Maybe it's one structure, and one of the in the rows one of the entries is which process does it belong to, or it could have a separate thread table for each process. Depends. So kernel is maintaining both the process table and the thread table. So it is aware of the existence of both processes and threads. So now when the thread or when the process wants to create another thread, makes a kernel call. Kernel carries this out and updates the thread table. Now the difference is thread operations will now involve system calls. So at once you can make out the overhead of this approach will be high. Every time you want to do a thread operation, you will need to make a system call. Okay, so overhead will be high. But that blocking problem will be solved now. When a thread blocks, the kernel can run another thread from the same process or one from a separate process. So now the kernel knows about, within a process, the kernel knows about the existence of all the constituent threads. So if consider process A, if thread 1 is blocking on a page fault for disk IO, now the kernel will not block the whole process because now it's aware of the constituent threads. So now only thread 1 of process A will be blocked and the CPU can be given to thread 2 provided it's ready. So this blocking problem is taken care of. Parallel execution of threads, all threads belonging to a same process will also happen now. Right, same reason, now it knows about the existence of the threads. Right. So, this is the advantage we get. In user space implementation, the runtime system keeps scheduling threads from the same process, till a CPU is taken away or no threads left to run. So scheduling of threads was also taken care of in the user space in the previous example. So either till the CPU is taken away, so kernel takes the CPU away from the process, which means it's taken away from the thread as well, or if there are no more threads to run. Previous page fault problem is also easily solved now. What about the cost of thread operations? They will of course be high, right? So this is an example of kernel level threads. Okay. So this is slide 6. Again, the picture of user level versus kernel level threads is showing up. Now part B is now your kernel threads. So here all the implementation is or management is done in the kernel space. In user threads, the implementation and management of threads was done in user space. Here it's in kernel space. So you can see now thread table as well as in addition to process table. Okay. So now every thread operation, you have a kernel crossing. Process wants to create a thread, kernel crossing. And for any other thread operation, there's a kernel crossing. So in that respect, the overhead time taken will be high, right? System call for each operation. Whereas on the other hand, the blocking problem is solved now, right? So this is so part A is a user level threads package. Part B is threads package managed by the kernel. Okay, so I hope now the difference between the two is clear. Threads are lightweight processes. They have code, instructions which need to be run. So question is, are these run in user space or kernel space? In user threads run in user space, right? And the kernel is aware of only the process, right? So advantage of that was thread operations are fast, no kernel crossings. Disadvantage is multiprocessing of multiple threads within a process is not there. Blocking issue is there. Kernel thread, the kernel maintains and implements all these threads. So for each thread operation there is a kernel crossing, additional overhead, but the blocking problem is solved. So as you can see, both have their pros and cons. So we must decide very carefully which one to use. Okay, so I hope it's clear, right? So now I am on slide number 7, and now we are talking about some multi-threading models. So now we know about the existence of user threads and kernel threads, right? User threads executing user code, kernel threads executing kernel code. Okay. And we also know that these threads can be implemented in user space or kernel space, right? So in the user level implementation or user space implementation, and the entire threads package is placed in user space. Okay. Kernel, once again I am repeating, kernel knows nothing about the threads. It's only managing ordinary processes. As far as the kernel is concerned, it's only managing an ordinary single threaded process. All the threads are abstracted. Whereas in the second approach, the threads package is managed entirely by the kernel. Okay, so we have to understand case 1, threads package is managed entirely in user space, and in the second case, thread package is managed by the kernel. Okay. So ultimately there has to exist a relationship between user threads and kernel threads, and there are several models. So we'll briefly discuss them. First model is many to one. So here, as the picture suggests, many user level threads, so typically belonging to the same process, are mapped to a single kernel thread. So this is the the first architecture we looked at. So many user level threads belonging to a same process are mapped to a single kernel thread. So from the point of view of kernel, it only sees one process. So it's exactly that same case. So obviously multiple threads now may not run in parallel because only one may be scheduled by the kernel at a time. Right? It can only schedule one of them at a time. It knows about only one process, so it is not even aware of the threads. Okay. So it can only support one at a time. So one thread blocks, entire process blocks. We discussed that. So a few systems currently use this model. This was used earlier when single CPUs were prevalent, were common. Right? Anyway, you can only run one at a time. Right? This kind of an architecture would not be very useful on a multi-core, multi-processor system. Because the whole point is, each thread runs on a separate CPU, which cannot happen in this case. Okay. So this is many to one. Very similar to the first architecture in which the user level thread package was implemented in, or we can say the threads package was implemented in user space. So whether we have n number of processes, each have their own number of threads. All of the threads are implemented in user space. Okay, so this is our many to one. Okay. Okay, now I am on slide 8. Now we look at one to one. So previously we had one kernel thread associated with many user threads. Here we have one to one, one kernel thread for each user thread. So each user level thread maps to a kernel thread, which means creating a user level thread creates a kernel thread. So now you can see sort of now the kernel is aware of the presence of the threads. Previously, kernel was aware only of the presence of a process, not its individual threads. Here it is aware of all the user threads. So it knows this is a process A, this has 3 threads. Why? How does it know? Because for each thread each user thread we have mapped it to a kernel thread. Okay. So kernel thread K1 mapped to user thread U1, K2 mapped to U2, right? Likewise, K3 mapped to thread 1 of process 2, K4 mapped to thread 2 of process 2, right? So this is definitely more concurrency than many to one. Now multiprocessing is possible, right? Each thread can be scheduled on a separate CPU, right? Of course, the overhead is there because it means creating a user level thread will create a kernel level thread, right? So 50 user threads means 50 kernel threads. So are they really required, right? So having said that, this is supported by almost all modern operating systems, Windows, Linux or Solaris. Okay. So this is the one to one, mapping each user thread to a kernel thread. Okay. Right. Okay. So now I am on slide 9. And this is a many to many model, kind of the middle path between the first two. First model was many to one, right? Like our first architecture we discussed, user level threads package. So advantage was good performance, less overhead. Disadvantage was no concurrency and issues with blocking, right? Second one we considered 1-to-1, one kernel thread per user thread, similar to threads package being managed by the kernel. So there we were able to do concurrency because now the kernel is aware of each thread, and our blocking problem was also taken care of. But the disadvantage was the overhead, system call needed for each thread operation. So how about if we have a sort of a mix of both of those? So we allow multiple kernel threads, but not the same as the number of user threads. Right. So let's say in this case we have 4 user threads, and let's say now we map them to only 3 kernel threads, not 4, not 1. So in this case we are trying to get the best of both worlds. We are trying to get a decent overhead, better than 1-to-1, right? And we are also trying to get good concurrency, and also trying to get rid of the blocking problem. So both previous approaches had some advantages and disadvantages, and here we are taking the middle path, right? So we get relatively good overheads because number of kernel threads is not equal to number of user threads, right? And also the other concurrency is also we are getting that, maybe not as much as 1-to-1, but still close to that. Okay, so this is the many to many model. So eventually the question is, ultimately in your system you have a user space and you have a kernel space, right? That is clear. Now within the user space your user threads run, your user code runs, and within the kernel space your kernel threads run, right? So user threads executing user code in user space, kernel threads executing kernel code in kernel space. Okay. Now from time to time you may need to do kernel crossings whenever you need some assistance from the OS or some assistance from the kernel. Whenever you need to do IO, for example, you will need to do a kernel crossing. Okay. So given this in mind, from time to time your user thread may need access to a kernel thread. So what exactly does it mean that we are mapping a user thread with a kernel thread? So it means that a user thread needs the kernel for performing some kernel operation, right? Whether memory related or scheduling related or IO related. And for doing that kernel operation, the user thread needs the assistance of a kernel thread. So user thread has to be mapped to a kernel thread. So in the first model, many to one, bunch of user threads are mapped to one kernel thread. And many times all the user threads are belonging to the same process. So which means kernel is not oblivious or is not aware of all of these threads, right? So obviously it can only accommodate one at a time. In the second model, one user thread per kernel thread. So this may be a wastage because perhaps a user thread does not need kernel operation at all. So in that case you may have created that kernel thread wastefully. So middle ground is to have many to many but have a number of kernel threads lower than the user threads. Okay. Yeah, so based on how we map, many user thread with one kernel thread, number of kernel threads equal to number of user threads, or number of kernel threads less than number of user threads. We have 3 models, but by and large the main idea is from time to time a user thread may need some kernel service, and for that it may have to get attached to, or it may have to be mapped to a kernel Okay. Okay. So now we are on slide 10, and what this slide discusses is the semantics of fork and exec with regards to multi-threading. So first of all, a recap on fork and exec. What do they do? Well, as far as a fork system call is concerned, it results in the creation of a new process. So if a process is executing and then it makes a fork system call, now we will have two processes running. One is a parent, the other is a child. By default, child is a copy of the parent, and then both of them run their own instructions. What do they run? Whatever is left in the program. And exec is if we want that in the child process, some other program should run. Like in the previous example, we did an exec with ls. So the address space of the child process is overwritten with the code for ls, right? So that is exec and fork. Now, so how does fork and exec work in the context of multi-threaded programs? So suppose that a multi-threaded process calls fork. So you have a process with multiple threads, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and then it calls fork. So what that will do is it will result in the creation of another process, that's for sure, child process. So now the design question is, does the new child process have as many threads as the old or parent process did, or does the new child process have just one thread? If it has one thread, which thread is it going to be? So Unix systems, so it depends on the how it's been implemented. The Unix systems have two versions, one for each scenario. So from the man page of fork 2, a child process is created with a single thread, the one that called fork. Okay, this is one version. Okay, so you have a process that's running, one of its threads called fork, right? So now the new child process that's created, it will be created with only a single thread. Which thread? The one that called fork. Right? The one that called fork. Other interpretation is that the new thread has same threads as the older one. So that's another one. Exec usually works as normal. So if a multi-threaded process calls exec, what happens? Right. So you have a process with 4 threads. Now it calls exec, or if one of the threads calls exec. So process specified in exec replaces the calling process, including all of its threads. So everything is gone. Okay. So once again, the question here is, if you have a multi-threaded process, how does fork work? All right. So if either the process calls fork, or if one of the threads they call fork. So how does it work? It depends on the implementation, and generally one implementation is that child process is created with a single thread, only one. Which one is it? The one that called fork. Other versions can also be there. Exec. Now if a multi-threaded process calls exec, so you have a process that spawns 10 children, and now they are all doing something, and then the process calls exec. So obviously its address space will be overwritten with the new argument, new application specified in exec. So which means all of its threads will also be overwritten. So in this way we have to be careful with how fork and exec behaves, and it is best to check your system's specifications to get the correct picture. Okay. Okay. Now I am on slide number 11, and as a practice, let's do a numerical example. So goal here is to show the difference between a server that's single threaded and a server that is multi-threaded. So here's a question. Consider reading a file from a single threaded server and a multi-threaded server. So in case 1, single threaded server is there, right, which means at any point of time only one request can be satisfied, one request for a file, right? Whereas in the multi-threaded server, as you can guess, each request is a separate thread, right, and then possibly running on multiple separate CPUs, right? So some other information is given. It takes 15 milliseconds to get a request for work, right, a file request, dispatch it and do the rest of the necessary processing, assuming that the data needed are in cache. So data if that we're looking for processing, if it's in the cache, whole operation file service processing time is 15 milliseconds if the data is in cache, file data. If a disk operation is needed, as is the case 1/3 of the time, an additional 75 milliseconds is required, during which time the thread sleeps. Okay, so if the file data which you need is not in the cache, then you have to do a disk IO, and while doing a disk IO you have to sleep. Okay, the thread has to sleep. How many requests per second can the server handle if it is single threaded? How many requests can it handle if it is multi-threaded? Okay. So in a single threaded web file server, what's happening? You give a request. If the file data is in cache, it takes 15 milliseconds. If the file data is in not in the cache, right, you have to schedule a disk IO, and the thread has to wait for the disk IO to complete. And note that because it's single threaded, you cannot give the CPU to any other request. So then after the 90 seconds are elapsed, 90 milliseconds are elapsed, then request 2, then request 3. So each request is followed sequentially. Where you have two scenarios: if your data is in cache, it takes 15 milliseconds. If your data is not in cache, it takes 90 milliseconds. Right? Okay, so now I am on slide 12 where we discuss the solution. Okay. So here we are given a file server and we have to predict its performance or quantify its performance. Case A, whether it's single threaded, case B, whether it's multi-threaded. So what is the difference between the two? So in the first case it's single threaded, right? So which means only a single thread of control, which means it can process only one request at a time. Okay, so the way it works is sequentially. The server will accept a request for a file. It will process that request, and once it's finished processing, it will accept the second request, then the third request, and then the fourth request. So it will essentially accept one request at a time. Okay, it is a single threaded file server. Okay, so in other words, it will be able to service only one client request at a time. Okay, so for each request that arrives, it creates a separate process, and because it's only single threaded, so only one thread within that process corresponding to the request. And then second one comes, it creates a second process, then third process. So one at a time. Request 1, request 2, so on. So in case the request is in the cache, 15 milliseconds. In case the file request is not in cache, 90 milliseconds. And we're also given that 1/3 of the time the request is not in the cache, and 2/3 it is. So we can calculate the weighted average, 2/3 into 15 plus 1/3 into 90. So which is 10 plus 30, 40 milliseconds. Average weighted time. for processing a file request. So number of requests per second, 1000 by 40, 25. So again what's happening here is single thread of control, single threaded file server, only one request at a time. That's it. Sequential. In a multi-threaded file server, what happens is now it can the server can generate one thread per request. Okay. And each request is a separate thread. And more importantly, each of those threads can run independently of each other. Okay. So in the single threaded case, let's say you have a request coming in, it's a disk IO, so you'll have to wait for 75 milliseconds, and then you do the 15. And then another one, let's say it's in cache, luckily 15. Third one is again disk, wait for 75 milliseconds and 15. So only one request at a time, so you see a lot of idle time was there. While the thread is sleeping, it's a single request at a time, so you cannot process anymore. Right, so a lot of idle time which was wasted. Now multi-threaded, now each request is a separate thread, right? And each of them can run independently. Each request, each thread can run independently of each other. Okay, so what happens is, if for a particular thread you need disk IO, it is waiting, then you can immediately give the CPU to the other thread in that process. So the effect is your waiting time is, or your disk waiting time is gone. Because let's say if thread 1 needs to do disk IO, then rather than waiting, because now you've got multiple threads running independently, and let's say thread 2, for thread 2 data is in cache, you can give the CPU to thread 2. So you have no idle time. So like this, if you have a sufficient number of in cache threads, then you essentially have no waiting time at all. So if that is the case, best case scenario, no waiting time. For multi-threaded file server, each request will take 15 milliseconds. So therefore, number of requests per second will be 1000 by 15, 66.67. So once again, what's happening in the first case is, it's single threaded, so only one request at a time. Okay. For each request, it makes a process. There is no scope for multi-threading. Each request is a separate process, only one at a time. Whereas in the second case, for each thread, for each request, it makes a separate thread. Right. So this we have this web server process. Each client request is a separate thread. So it's supporting, let's say, 20 client requests, for which there are 20 threads, and 20 threads are running independently of each other. Okay. So when one particular, and we know that it's not 20, if it's a busy one, it can be hundreds and even thousands, very large number of requests. So if one particular request waits on disk IO, CPU can be immediately given to some other request which needs the CPU right away, and therefore that disk IO time is gone. So if you have a sufficient number of requests, disk IO time is gone. Each request takes 15 milliseconds. So number of requests is now 66.67. Okay, so I hope now that this solution is clear. Okay. Okay, so now I am on the last slide, and this is the end of chapter number 4, and we will discuss some more multi-threading programs, but that will be discussed in one of the live sessions. So in the live session, we'll in real time we'll go through the code of those multi-threading programs, and then we will discuss them. So, but besides those extra multi-threaded programs, we have come to the end of chapter 4. So once again, to recap, what we learned here was the concept of multi-threading. Why is it used, right? For supporting parallel processing. We discussed the pthreads API, using which we can create multi-threaded programs, and finally we looked at various thread implementations in user space, in kernel space, many to one, many to many, one to one, and so on. So that's the end of chapter number 4. Okay.